Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack here. It is now Sunday, the 11th of August, 2024. We have Invest Area 98L to discuss today, and big question is how close does it get to the lower 48? But before that, it is going to likely impact the Lesser Antilles. We need to address that. And I've seen a lot of these out to sea comments on social media. Well, yeah, it'll probably turn away from the lower 48. But before it does so, out to sea, well, it does have the potential to impact the Northeast Caribbean, where the last time I checked, there were quite a few islands down there, and islands do count as land, so we could be looking at some land interaction here over the next few days. And then we are going to get impacts for the lower 48 by way of large ocean swells. I believe this is going to become a hurricane, and that could lead to life-threatening rip currents, maybe some overwash in some of the more sensitive areas. We just have to remember, these systems, even if they don't directly impact us, they do have indirect impacts, and that's what we always have to keep in mind. It's all about the impact at the end of the day. All right? So let's get started. First, National Hurricane Center homepage. I fully expect that at 5 p.m. today, the National Hurricane Center will designate this as our next potential tropical cyclone, PTC number 5. I believe that's coming. And remember, that's the designation that's given before these. I thought that I made the stroke size bigger there. Come on. There we go. That's the designation that is given to these systems when they are a threat to land. And you need to get those watches and warnings up, but it's not quite yet a depression or a storm or a hurricane. And so I think this will be a potential tropical cyclone, advisories initiated, all that kind of stuff, at 5 p.m. Eastern today. That's my thought. That's not the official take, but that's what I think will happen. And, of course, the development area in the red here, very high chance that this goes on to develop. All the computer models are all over it. As we examine the different parameters of it, you'll see pretty convincing argument that this will be our next named storm. Ernesto will be the name, and it's probably also going to become a hurricane. And then we're going to end today's update with some speculation about what it could do to the sea surface temperature pattern, something very interesting to watch as we go forward, all right? So here it is on the satellite loop, courtesy of Tropical Tidbits, early this afternoon. Very easy to identify our area out here. We've got that S shape with it overall, a potent tropical wave, a large area of disorganized showers and thunderstorms so far, but it's all gradually coming together. And for our friends over here in the northeast corner of the Caribbean Sea, you're going to need to be watching this very closely. The potential, and this is important, of an intensifying tropical storm, maybe a hurricane by the time it reaches the islands. I don't want to speculate too far out on that, but we do know that intensity forecasting is where there is the least amount of skill in the science. Track forecasting is really good overall. Intensity forecasting, not so much. All right, so just keep that in mind. But I'm telling you, an intensifying system is different from one that is weakening. And I know that sounds obvious, but I need to make that point. When these things are coming in and they are ramping up, the wind gusts seem to be more prolific. Everything just seems to be amped up because it's on its way up instead of steady state or coming down. So we're going to have a very interesting few days ahead of us here as we track this towards the Caribbean and then eventually maybe Bermuda for direct impacts. And then we're going to talk about impacts to the North American mainland up here and even our friends over in the Bahamas, because there will be impacts, even if it's not directly related to the would-be hurricane coming right over you. All right? So the vorticity signature, one of my favorite products. I talk about this a lot. Very easy to spot there, and it was also easy to spot on the satellite animation, that's for sure. There's another huge area of energy out near the Cabo Verde Islands, formerly known as the Cape Verde Islands, and we'll have to watch that too. Hey, look, it's getting towards mid-August. We are 9 days from the August 20th traditional ringing of the meteorological, climatological bell, where the hurricane season naturally starts to ramp up rapidly, and we're going well on our way into the busy forecasts that we were told. It looks like that is going to happen. So what do we got? Well, here's the Invest 98L dashboard over on the Tropical Tidbits page, and let me just spend I don't know, 30, 45 seconds explaining to the newcomers what a 98L is. It's basically an area of investigation. The Hurricane Center assigns numbers 90 through 99, and then they start over, 90 through 99. And it's just a way to designate resources like satellite floaters, get the computer models running, and it's an area of interest, a suspect area, AOI, area of interest, whatever you want to call it. And it turns out that for us in the weather world, we just shorten it to 98L when it's actually AL90 for Atlantic, AL for Atlantic, EP for Eastern Pacific. So if this was in the Pacific, we would call it 98E or whatever the number would be for the Pacific at this time. So that's what an invest area is, 90 through 99, and then the L for Atlantic. All right, so with that out of the way, let's get started. I already showed you the satellite. That's where it's plotted on the surface chart. And then this is our famous spaghetti model chart. And, I mean, really, you can just take a look at this, and you want to really look for that TVC, X, TVCN, whatever, the consensus models. Those are pretty darn good. That takes into account pretty much, well, there's a certain group that's in there. But instead of hunting down the GFS, the Euro, the Canadian, the Icon, what does the HWRF say? What does the HMON say? Do they even do the HMON anymore? Whatever, right? What are the halves? The halves A, the halves B. You could take hours, or you could just look at this chart from Dr. Cowan's website or elsewhere. Weather Nerds has them. The weathermodels.com, whatever. I'm sure they're everywhere, right? And it's really helpful because you can see two things. The clustering, the tightness of the overall envelope, pretty good. We don't have a bunch out here and then some way over here and some like that. So the convergence is pretty good. We don't have a lot of divergence. Yes, there is more divergence farther out in time or further out in time, whatever you're supposed to say. But the more reliable models, generally everything's pretty tightly clustered with an eventual track into the Northeast Caribbean Sea. So that is important because it also looks like from the intensity guidance, and this is the envelope that you really don't want to see consistently tightly clustered, especially when it goes high like that. And again, some divergence overall, but the general idea is this direction, and that is toward hurricane intensity. Green is tropical storm, yellow and beyond hurricane. And that word is important. Yes, especially down in the deep tropics, because an intensifying hurricane coming through your area can be problematic. Again, I talked about that before. The wind speeds, everything, the gust, everything just seems to be exacerbated when you have an intensifying system. And notice that a majority of the guidance, let's discount the green one right here. Let's just put an X here. But a majority of the guidance says that within 72 hours, we should hit intensity, hurricane intensity Cat 1. And then it just intensifies from there. That is important. 72 hours. Let's go back and look at the tracks. At 72 hours, our system would be in the vicinity of the islands over here, depending on the forward speed. Kind of have a window like that. And that is in the Northeast Caribbean. Therefore, I think the threat of a hurricane is real, and you guys need to take that very seriously down there. A lot of heavy rain, you know the drill, especially if you've lived there for any amount of time. Could it rapidly intensify? Let's don't even worry about that right now. Go back to the satellite animation real quick. It's still a broad center, whatever. It's not consolidating. Let's give it some time before we worry about how strong it could eventually get. All right? So this is from our different spaghetti plots and whatnot. Let's look at the global models. This is the GFS. This is the very latest run from today. So there it is, 12Z, 12 Zulu time, 8 a.m. Eastern time, initialized, 850 millibars in the atmosphere, my favorite layer for tracking tropical cyclones. And I talk about that very often because the structure, that low-level structure, the 5,000-foot area, the 850 millibar structure, or what we call vorticity, if it looks good there and you got a good framework, everything can build upwards from that point. So that's why I like this particular layer of the atmosphere when we track these things, especially initially as they're getting started. So let's put this into motion. We're looking at the Western Atlantic. There comes our area of interest right here. And this is 30 hours out. It doesn't look like very much, but it's getting its act together. And it does so fairly quickly there, so that by Tuesday morning, it's knocking on the door of Guadeloupe, Antigua, etc., and then eventually through the Virgin Islands, and maybe just to the east and northeast of Puerto Rico. So I would suspect we're going to get watches. Maybe a hurricane watch gets issued later today. We'll have to see about that. But this does go right through the area. And while we're here, let's stop this right at 72 hours. And that's an important benchmark. Remember what I showed you? The intensity guidance was suggesting that by 72 hours, a lot of those different models for intensity were showing that this would be a hurricane by 72 hours. Where is it? Parked right over the U.S. and British Virgin Islands and vicinity. So just keep that in mind. If you're down there or you have plans to travel down there, you got to be ready for a potential hurricane. Let's look real quick at the upper levels, because I like to examine. We're now close to the surface here. What about way up at 200 millibars? I mean, that's about as perfect as you can get. Outflow in all the quadrants, even a little bit of a jet over here, really exhausting the air, like an exhaust system, right? Getting it evacuated from the center down there. This is all clockwise. So I look at that. You look at the overall sea surface temperature profile down here. The moisture's there. We have a solid tropical wave. No reason to believe that this will do anything other than strengthen and become a problem here for our friends in the Northeast Caribbean. Then, and at this point I know a lot of people are going to want to sort of tune out, not just to me, but to the system, Ernesto to be. Why? Because it doesn't just barrel on into the Southeast United States, and I understand that. But even at this point right here, we're going to use blue to highlight this, Ernesto to be, concentric circles would certainly be the situation, but I'm just going to draw them this way. What is that? That's the wave energy. And it's going to take a few days, but those waves will hit the southeast. They will hit the Bahamas. They will impact the north shore of the greater Antilles. And those waves, depending on how strong and how large a circulation this is, will generate rip currents. And we will be approaching the next weekend coming up as we move this forward. There's Friday. It's even stronger in the model. And then we get to Saturday, right here, Friday night into Saturday. What's happening along the coast of the United States over here? Lots and lots of visitors. And you're going to have this wave energy coming out. Swells and the generated rip currents from that do result in death. And we have to be very poignant about that. If you're going to the beach next weekend, you live at the beach, you're taking your kids to the beach, whatever, please take this into consideration and be safe out there. Look at the lifeguard stands. If they've got the red flags, don't go in the water, or just go to your knees or something like, up to your knees, because swells and rip currents are an impact, just like rain, just like storm surge, and just like wind, and even the tornadoes that we get from these things. So please don't write this off as a no impact. Oh, who cares? It's not hitting the United States. We don't want any funerals the week after. Seriously, got to be as blunt about it as I can be. So it comes around, goes to the Caribbean. This is Bermuda. We got a few friends over there, don't we, Howard? Yes, we do. And how close does it get to Bermuda on this run? Too close for comfort. So, this is 6 days out. It could be farther away, it could be closer, it could go right over. We know how this plays out. But we'll be watching that closely. We have a couple friends down here in the Virgin Islands, namely Brent and Tim. They will cover that for us down there. I was thinking about Puerto Rico, but the guidance seems to be pulling this up just east of Puerto Rico. So I'll be watching Bermuda closely. That's a hard target to hit, which is good for them. But we'll see. If I can get to Bermuda or if I need to, I certainly will. But this goes on out, and let's broaden this out just a little bit real quick to make sure there's no shenanigans happening. So I'm literally looking at this as it is rendering, by the way. It's not like I knew the outcome before. So let's back it up. There it is, comes up, and it tries to cut back a little bit there, but we're way out in a week's time. Too much low pressure in the steering layers of the atmosphere. Very little chance this comes back and impacts the United States directly. But that doesn't mean it can't happen, all right? Why is it doing this? Well, I want to show you first the Euro. This is last night. Very similar solution, though weaker, starting off. And the Euro just seems to always play catch-up on the intensity, whatever. Steering, though, generally the same, very close to Bermuda by about a week's time. In fact, really close on the 0Z run there. And again, the Euro suggests lots and lots of wave energy headed towards the East Coast and elsewhere. Surfers, you're going to love it. Everybody else, be very, very, even the surfers have to be careful. A lot of waves coming up, a lot of wave energy. So why is this system more than likely not going to affect the United States directly? And it goes back to the old thumbnail over here. How close? Not too close. And the reason is the upper atmosphere. Currently, the Euro, these are your height anomalies in the atmosphere, your ridges and your troughs, and how thick they are. We call that thicknesses, and it's all measured kind of like topographic maps, but this is topo maps for the atmosphere. This is a big chunk of air sitting out here, the subtropical ridge. This is a trough of low pressure, and these are your anomalies. These are your departures from the normal pressure pattern. So let's just move this out into time. This is from the Euro, and once we start to see our system show up, which is right about there, I'll point it out to you, this blue area right here, that's the would-be tropical cyclone. Notice what we do not have all along its potential path. None of this. Very little ridging at all. It's just all eroded away. So this will naturally head towards the higher latitudes. It's fairly simple meteorology. And the ridge does not build back over the top. Instead, we've got this little trough sitting out here, kind of persistent there over the next several days, and that allows our tropical cyclone to move on out into the open Atlantic, and that should be pretty cut and dry. Yes, things can change, but hard to believe that this kind of a pattern will change that dramatically. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but that's the reason why it looks like this will head on out. So real quick, our friends down here in the Caribbean, please be paying attention to this very carefully. From Guadeloupe to Antigua, Barbuda, all the way over to the areas that I'm most familiar with, and that's the U.S. and British Virgin Islands, and all these areas in between. We could get hurricane conditions through here or close to it over the coming days. And even our friends in Puerto Rico, you know, as it goes by, you could get that west side of it impacting Puerto Rico. And there's still time for this to adjust west enough that it has direct impacts on Puerto Rico. So just reminding you of that. Now here's my little speculative ending to today's update. I want you to notice something. We've hammered away, and I think appropriately so, at all these crazy warm, sea surface temperatures relative to average. Lots and lots have been made about that. But look how warm the sea surface temperatures are in the far North Atlantic. Warmer than we're seeing in the deep tropics relative to average. In other words, these anomalies are more than these anomalies. You can clearly see that. So what I think might happen, and this will be interesting to watch, this is the supposed track, let's just pretend, of our system, and I'll cut Howard a break, and we'll assume that it goes east of Bermuda like that. And let's say it goes on up into the Atlantic like this. That's the center line, of course. You know, the hurricane would be much bigger. I think, first of all, it's going to chisel away at all this, which is, yeah, relatively close to normal. But then all of this above normal stuff up here could get a good little slice taken out of it. Then you start to defocus all of this energy, and it gets more focused down here. It's going to take a few of these recurves to do that, but this could be the first one that does so. And that's just something that we can watch. I think it's really neat because you can see the tracks of these systems. I mean, look, Debbie, with its influence here close to the coast of the southeast, we now have below normal sea surface temperatures by almost 1 degree Celsius just off the Carolinas and parts of Florida there. So it's going to be interesting to see, does this kind of hammer away a little bit, maybe chisels the better word, at those very positive anomalies in the north latitudes there of the Atlantic. We'll be able to watch that as it unfolds. All right? So there you go. That's what I know. And again, I think by 5 p.m. today, this will be potential Tropical Cyclone 5 because we're up to the 5th one. And we'll track it and we'll see what's up. All right? Have yourself